King Menelaus and his wife, Queen Helen of Sparta, were in the middle of a double wedding feast. Their son was marrying one bride, his daughter another groom, and the whole palace was packed with guests. Music filled the hall by their bard, while two acrobats spun and flipped in dizzying reels to entertain the crowd. Then voices were heard at the doorway. A squire came up to Menelaus and reported that two strangers of fine appearance were waiting outside, asking for a place to stay. "Shall I bring them in?" the squire asked, "or send them to another house?" "Have you lost your senses?" Menelaus replied, sounding almost offended. "After all the years I wandered the world, living on the kindness of strangers, could I ever turn anyone away? Of all people in the world, I shall break the holy principles of Xenia mandated by Zeus himself. Unyoke their horses and invite them in at once." At his command, several servants hurried off. The travel-worn horses, slick with sweat from the road, were led into the stable. And Telemachus, with his companion, Pisistratus, the son of Nestor, were welcomed into the grand hall. The palace was among the richest and most beautiful in all Greece, and Telemachus stood wide-eyed at the treasures around him. Once the guests had bathed and changed into fresh clothes, they were led back into the hall and seated in places of honor near Menelaus himself. The prince greeted them warmly. "Welcome to my home, young gentlemen," he said. He kissed Pisistratus on his forehead. "Young Pisistratus, look at you. So big now." He turned to Telemachus and grabbed his hand. "I can see you are not of ordinary birth. Zeus himself seems to have marked you with his favor, and anyone could tell you come from a royal line." Telemachus was about to reply as Menelaus raised his hand. "Eat first, and then we'll talk some more." He clapped his hands, and servants quickly brought a fine meal. When the plates were cleared, Telemachus leaned close to Pisistratus and whispered so no one else could hear, "Have you ever seen anything like this? Look at the gold, the silver, the ivory everywhere. It's dazzling. Only the palace of Zeus himself could be more splendid." Menelaus had sharp ears, and he caught Telemachus's last words. Smiling, he said, "Ah, my friend, no human can match the everlasting splendor of Zeus. As for my own wealth, well, whether any man can rival me, I do not know. I traveled far and for many years to gather it, to Cyprus, Syria, Phoenicia, and even as far as Egypt on the coast of Africa, a place overflowing with sheep, where the flocks give birth 3 times a year, and even the poorest shepherd has more milk, cheese, and meat than he could ever use. From each land I brought home treasures, and now I live surrounded by plenty. But my heart is not always light. If I had sailed straight home from Troy, I would have returned a poor man. My house was in ruins, but I would not have had to grieve for my brother, murdered as you've surely heard. And there is another sorrow that never leaves me. The friends who died for my cause at Troy, most of all, one dearer to me than any, Odysseus, always first in courage and cunning. I see his face in the day, I dream of him at night, and it makes my sleep restless and my meals taste bitter. He bore more troubles than any man, and how heavy must be the fate of his wife Penelope and of his son Telemachus. At the mention of his father, Telemachus pulled his cloak up over his face as tears welled up in his eyes. Menelaus, seeing his grief, began to guess who the young man might be, but for the moment he kept his thoughts to himself. Just then, there was a small stir at the back of the hall, a ripple of whispers. "The Queen! The Queen!" And there she was, moving forward with calm, measured steps. Helen, daughter of Tyndareus, wife of Menelaus, and still the most beautiful woman in all of Greece. Both Telemachus and Pisistratus stood up as she entered. Pisistratus took her hand and kissed it. She looked at Menelaus and smiled as she ruffled Pisistratus's hair. "My lord, the years go by fast." Telemachus also kissed her hand. as Helen looked intensely at him, trying to figure him out. A maid set a chair for her, covering it with a soft rug, and placed a footstool beneath her feet. Another servant brought a silver basket with golden edges, filled with purple wool for her weaving. Helen seated herself gracefully, but her gaze stayed on Telemachus. She studied him for a long moment, then turned to her husband.
"Menelaus,"
She said,
shall I speak the thought in my heart?
"Never have I seen such a likeness as this young man bears to Odysseus. Surely this is Telemachus, the son he left as a baby in Ithaca, when the call came to sail for Troy and fight for a woman not worth the war." "I have noticed it too," answered Menelaus, "his face and the glance of his eyes. And when I made mention of Odysseus, he attempted to cover his face with tears in his eyes." Telemachus was still too distressed to speak, and Pisistratus had to answer for him. "What you say is true, my lord. It is Telemachus himself. Nestor sent me with him to ask you and crave counsel of your wisdom. He is left like an orphan in his home, with no one to aid him and take his father's place." Then Menelaus drew near to Telemachus, and as he took his hands in his, he kindly said, "Welcome again, and welcome to these halls, son of my truest friend and helper. It was the dream of my life to bring Odysseus and all his household from Ithaca, and give him a home and a city in this land, that we might grow old together, in friendship and loving kindness, never to be parted until death. Envious gods have blighted my hopes and hindered his return. But let us put sorrow aside and turn to our supper. The day is nearly gone, and we have plenty to talk about, enough to fill all of tomorrow." When the meal was done and the wine cups were ready to be refilled, Helen turned to the servants. "Bring us some of that delicious Trojan baklava and lukumi," Helen told the servant near her with a big smile on her face. Immediately, huge trays of small, bite-sized sweets were brought on silver plates. Menelaus greedily grabbed an entire tray for himself. "Who says they didn't have good food in Troy?" he laughed, as he stuffed 3 sweets into his mouth at the same time. Helen did not seem too amused by his gluttony, Telemachus noticed. She leaned close to the cupbearer, whispered a few words, and slipped quietly from the hall. Not long after, she returned holding a small, delicate phial. Without a word, she tipped its contents into the great mixing bowl from which all the cups were filled. "Now drink," she said with a calm smile, "and have no fear that grief will trouble us again tonight. Into the wine I have poured a rare and wondrous drug, a gift from Polydamna, wife of Thon in Egypt. The soil of Egypt yields many such potions, some harmful, some healing, and its people are the most skilled in such arts of any in the world. Whoever drinks this will be safe from all sorrow. Even if his father and mother were to die, he would shed no tear. Such is its power." Menelaus didn't want any more wine, though, and pointed to his cup. "This wine is more than intoxicating enough for me." The others drank of the wine, and a gentler mood settled over them. Telemachus took a sip of his wine and immediately felt his head spinning. Helen then spoke again. "Let me tell you a story of the courage of your father Odysseus. During the long siege, the Trojans were trapped inside their walls by the Greek army. Odysseus disguised himself as a beggar, dressed in filthy rags, and marked his skin with cruel wounds to complete the deception. During this time, there were many beggars and people in bad condition inside the city, as the Greeks would not allow any food to enter, for good reason, of course. So in this state, he slipped into the city. I recognized him at the marketplace, though. I alone among all the Trojans knew who he really was. From the marketplace, I brought him to my home and questioned him about the Greek army and their plans to save me. But he pretended not to understand. At last, when I welcomed him as a guest and swore a solemn oath not to betray him, he trusted me immediately. Menelaus seemed to smile solemnly at that remark.
He told me how the Greeks had planned to infiltrate the city, but for some reason, he forgot about the horse. Or maybe that was not part of the plan yet. Anyhow, I gave him vital information about the city, without which the plan would never have worked. Later, in the dead of night, with my help, he slipped back into the streets. There he struck down many Trojans with his sword, many of them quite young, and then returned to the camp with vital news for his comrades, which I had provided him. When dawn came, cries of mourning rose throughout Troy. Many mothers had lost their young sons by the sword of Odysseus. But in my heart I rejoiced. I longed for my home, and I saw clearly the madness I had been led into by Aphrodite's spell when I left my father's house and betrayed my lord. Menelaus muttered something under his breath that to Telemachus sounded like Aphrodite's spell. He noticed Helen sending a death stare towards her husband, lasting less than a blink of an eye, but enough for Telemachus to notice.
"That's a great story, my dear," said Menelaus, "and a great example of his courage. Let me tell you one of mine. It was the night me and Odysseus were crammed inside the Trojan horse with a few others. The Trojans, dumbasses as they were, had brought the wooden horse we had left inside the city walls, thinking it was a gift to the gods. Such a bunch of fools." Menelaus looked up at Helen, who just smiled and nodded. "So anyway, we were just waiting for the night, so everyone would leave and we could open the gates. Everything was going exactly as planned. Then you appeared, Helen. I could see you through the cracks. I swear you must have been guided by some god who was trying to get us all killed. And Deiphobus, the brother of Paris, was with you, with his hand on your back. You walked around our hiding place inside the wooden horse 3 times, even running your hand along the wood. And then for some reason you started calling out the names of the Greek princes, your voice exactly like the voice of each man's wife, almost as if you wanted us to come outside the wooden horse and reveal ourselves. Inside, Diomedes and I nearly answered you. We even thought about climbing out to see you, but Odysseus wouldn't allow it. When one of us actually opened his mouth to shout, Odysseus clamped his hand over his mouth and held him still until you'd gone away. And in that way, he saved all of our lives." "Such a nice story you happen to remember just now. You seem to have forgotten about the knife Deiphobus was holding to my back," Helen smiled, grinding her teeth. "Seems like things were often held behind your back," Menelaus replied. As he looked at her waist, Telemachus began to feel awkward, as if he had just stepped into a conversation he was not supposed to be a part of. "Yes," Telemachus discreetly tried to change the topic. "He had a heart of iron, but what good has it done him? Even his courage and cunning couldn't save him from disaster. Anyway, let's stop talking about it. I'm a little tired. What do you say we get some sleep and leave our troubles for the morning?" "Good idea," Helen replied. She then ordered the servants to prepare beds for the guests. "In the morning, I can tell you more about where I think he might be," Menelaus told him, before he went to his own chambers with his wife Helen. Early the next morning, Telemachus woke up with a huge headache. Menelaus was already waiting at his side. Once he was dressed, Menelaus took him to a quiet corner, away from the noise of the household, and asked gently what really bothered him. Telemachus poured out his troubles. The suitors, their endless feasting, their waste of his family's wealth, and the way they pressed his mother to choose a new husband. As he spoke, Menelaus's face darkened with anger. "What?" he burst out. "Those shameless fools, sitting in the seat of mighty Odysseus, daring even to dream of marrying his wife. Let me tell you what their fate will be. They're like a bunch of baby deer left in a lion's den. And when the lion comes back, what happens? He finds the baby deer in his den and tears them apart in an instant.
That, my young friend, is what will happen when Odysseus returns to Ithaca. He will fall on them like a storm, and not one will escape." Then Menelaus softened a little and said, "But you came here for news, and I'll not hold back. I'll tell you honestly what I know of your father's fate since the day we parted after Troy. In Egypt, I met with the sea god Proteus, who told me about all my friends who had died. Ajax, Achilles, my friends, my own brother. And then he told me how Odysseus was stuck on an island with a goddess. He is alive, but he cannot escape easily." Telemachus smiled politely, although he doubted the words of his host. "Thank you for your hospitality and everything you have told me. I shall return to Ithaca and tell my mother the good news. Listen, young Telemachus. This is Sparta. Our home is your home. Stay a bit longer." But Telemachus politely declined the invitation.
"Son of Atreus," Telemachus replied, "please do not press me to stay longer. I should be contented to remain with you for another 12 months. I find your conversation so delightful that I should never once wish myself at home. But my crew, whom I have left at Pylos, are already impatient." Menelaus smiled broadly and grabbed Telemachus's hand with both his hands. "Dear lords," he said, "you are as charming in your words and mannerism as Odysseus himself." He nodded at one of the servants who came closer to them. "Please accept the finest and most precious piece of plate in all my house. It is a mixing bowl by Vulcan's own hand of pure silver, except the rim, which is inlaid with gold. Phaedimus, king of the Sidonians, gave it to me during a visit I paid him on my way home. I will make you a present of it." Menelaus then gave him a large fatherly bear hug. While Telemachus was gathering data on his father in Pylos and Sparta, in Ithaca the suitors were unsuspecting and didn't even notice he was gone. Gathered in front of Odysseus's palace as usual, some were throwing rings onto small poles in the grass. Others were hurling their spears at targets, passing time with noisy games. A young hostess by the name Melantho was sitting on the lap of Eurymachus. He slipped a gold coin between her bosom. "Oh, my master," she giggled, "you are so kind." Eurymachus gave her a small flask and whispered in her ear, "For the queen's supper, or should I call it her last supper." Melantho stared surprisingly at Eurymachus, who just nodded at her with a big smile. She gave him a tight hug. "Oh, my master, my king, yes, yes, finally, tonight." He put a finger to her lips and nodded to her with a big smile on his face. Medon, the friend of Telemachus, was discreetly listening in on the exchange between the two and realized he needed to get that flask before Melantho was able to use it. While the other suitors were running around, a young nobleman, Noman, strolled up to Antinous, who was standing nearby watching. "You know what, Anton? I am going to need my ship back. Have you heard anything of Telemachus? I'd like to know how long he needs it." Antinous looked at him with contempt. "It's Antinous. And what do you mean, how long he needs it?" "What do I mean? He borrowed my ship, and I need it back. You know what? Just tell me. Is he still at Pylos, or has he, returned or whatever?" Antinous froze. His jaw dropped in surprise, for he and the other suitors had no idea that Telemachus had left Ithaca at all. They had assumed he was still somewhere on his father's farmland. Quickly, Antinous pressed the young man with questions. "When did he go? Who went with him? Did he take your ship by force?" "By force? What do you mean by force?" the lad replied. "I lent it to him, He is my buddy. A lot of the guys went along. None of them had ever been to Pylos before. I have been there many times. The chicks there are super hot, like smoking hot, And the captain, you know what?
"No, I don't know what," Antinous replied impatiently. "The captain, listen to this. I thought it was Mentor, or whatever," he laughed. "But you know what? Here's the strange thing, Ree. I am pretty sure I saw Mentor just yesterday in the city. You know what? Either Mentor has a doppelganger running around, or I had a little too much wine," he laughed. "Go to Hades," Antinous replied. "Already there, Ree," the young man laughed as he walked away. Antinous yelled at the suitors to stop their games and follow him into the barn. When Antinous told them what he had just heard, hushed, angry voices murmured throughout the crowd. What none of them had noticed were a pair of eyes just beyond the fence. The young servant, Medon, loyal friend of Telemachus, crouched low, heart hammering against his ribs. He pressed closer, straining to catch every syllable that dripped from Antinous's lips. "This kid has to die," he said, his voice sharp with scorn. "If we let him carry on like this, he'll ruin everything for us. He might be putting together an army in Sparta as we speak." "Oh shit. Listen, I knew this had to end. It was fun while it lasted. I'm going back home," one of the suitors replied in fear. "Can you just shut up for a moment? Listen, this is what we are going to do. A few of us are going to crew a ship and hide it in the narrow strait between Ithaca and Samos. There we wait. How long?" Antinous looked like he was about to slap the suitor on the face, but kept his composure. "And when he sails back, we end his adventures once and for all. We send the little shit to Hades. This little voyage of his will cost him dearly." The suitors clapped and nodded in agreement. Antinous smiled and looked very satisfied with himself.
Medon's eyes widened to the size of teacups. He knew he had to warn Queen Penelope. His heart thudded like a drum, louder, he feared, than his own footsteps. He turned from the fence, only to stumble straight into a bucket. Clang! The dreadful sound rang out like a bell announcing his doom. Every suitor's head snapped toward him, their eyes narrowed, sharp and cruel. Medon froze, caught like a rabbit in the flame, every muscle screaming, "Run!" while his legs refused to listen. Then came the shout. "He heard everything! Get him!" That broke the spell. Medon bolted, tearing into the shadows with every scrap of strength left in him. Behind him rose the pounding of feet, the wild jeers of men who hunted for sport. Antinous, cruel as ever, didn't bother chasing. Instead, he drew a dagger, his arm rising with terrible ease. With a flick of his wrist, thwack! The blade whistled through the air and struck deep into Medon's back, just as he vanished into the dark. Medon staggered, his breath caught, but still he kept moving, vanishing beyond their sight. "Forget him!" Antinous sneered, laughter spilling from his lips like poison. "He's already dead." They all are. Fired up by Antinous's words, they trooped into Odysseus's house, resolved to carry out his dark plan. But Medon had not in fact died by the dagger. Not yet, at least. Without a moment's delay, Medon hurried inside to Penelope's chamber, where he found her sitting with her handmaids. As soon as he appeared at the doorway, Penelope fixed him with a look full of weary reproach. Medon tried to catch his breath. "Well then, Medon," she said bitterly, "what message do you bring from your fine masters now? Do they command that my maidens drop their work and set out another feast for them, out on their endless feasting and shameless wooing? May this be the last bite they ever taste beneath my roof. Ungrateful men! Have they so soon forgotten all the good that Odysseus did for them, the kindness he showed, the honor he gave? Yes, it seems all is forgotten. They think only of stuffing themselves on his wealth, growing fat while they devour his house." "My lady," said Medon,
bowing his head, struggling to breathe. "I wish that was the worst of it. But the truth is far heavier. Telemachus has sailed away to Pylos to seek news of his father, and the suitors, those wolves in your own house, are plotting to... They want to what?" Queen Penelope asked him angrily. "They want to kill him on his way home."
Penelope froze completely, struck dumb by the cruel blow. Her legs failed her, and she fell to the ground. For a long time she could not speak. She did not even notice the long trail of blood Medon left behind. Medon had left the chamber of Penelope and went into the kitchen, closing the door behind him. Penelope stumbled to her feet and took a few steps toward the door, but her strength gave way. She wobbled and sank back against the wall, sliding to the ground in despair. Her handmaids rushed around, reaching out to help her rise, but she waved them off. At last, her grief poured out in a voice broken with sobs. "Damned am I, more than any woman on this earth. First I lost my lion-hearted husband, and now the winds have stolen away my beloved son without even a word of farewell. Cruel hearts, why did none of you tell me of his plan? Had I known, I would have begged him to stay. Quick, one of you, fetch old Dolius, the keeper of my garden and orchard. Let him go at once to Laertes and tell him everything. Perhaps he can talk to the elders and they can stop their sons from committing this atrocity." Then Eurycleia, faithful and wise, bent down on her knees to speak to her.
"Dearest lady, I will tell you the whole truth, though if you wish to strike me down afterward, I will not resist. I did know of this journey, but Telemachus made me swear a sacred oath to keep it from you, at least until 12 days had passed, or until you learned of it by some other means. He feared your grief would eat away at you if you knew. You knew about it, and you didn't tell me anything? Yes, but don't worry. Trust the plan of the gods. Surely the gods have not cursed the house of Odysseus so completely, nor do they plan to destroy it. Trouble not old Laertes in his sorrow, and don't let those wolves know you know about their plans. Instead, wash your face, put on clean clothes, and go to your upper chamber. There, pray to bright-eyed Athena, ask her to watch over your son, and keep him safe from harm." She grabbed Penelope under the shoulders, lifted her up and wiped the tears from her cheeks. Eurycleia put both hands on Penelope's cheeks. "Come on now, be the queen we all know you are, the one who has been able to manipulate and hold off the suitors for years, while running all the herds and farms and houses. Remember what Odysseus used to say, whatever comes your way, use it to your advantage." Penelope nodded slowly as she wiped away tears from her face. She gathered her handmaids and stumbled to the upper chamber. There, before the small shrine of Athena, she placed her offerings, lifted her hands, and prayed aloud. "Daughter of Zeus, warrior maiden, if ever my husband Odysseus made a sacrifice pleasing to you, remember him now. Save his son, and do not let these greedy suitors bring him harm." When her prayer was finished, the women raised their own voices too, calling again and again on the mighty name of Athena. Then, when the chamber was quiet, they left her alone. Penelope sank onto a couch, drained by her grief and fear. At last her tossing ceased, and she began slipping in and out of sleep. All the women left the chamber of Penelope, letting her sleep in peace. Melantho stayed in the chamber, though, with a small flask in her hand and a sly smile on her face. Meanwhile, Medon sat slumped in the corner of the kitchen, afraid to pull the knife out of his back. He made a feeble attempt to press a cloth against his wound, but his arm refused to cooperate. Blood was everywhere, splashed about so generously that the kitchen floor now had all the grip of a freshly polished ice rink. Each breath of air became more and more desperate. He closed his eyes. Just then, crash! The sound of cups smashing onto the tiles exploded through the galley. And then a scream. Medon! It was Alexandra, the girl he, in a drunken moment, had promised to marry. She froze at the sight of the blood, her face a mix of shock and horror. Then she ran to him, her hands desperately trying to hold back the red tide. Medon gave her a weak, silly smile. In his head, he thought, well, at least I won't die alone. That's something, isn't it? He gathered the strength to give Alexandra an important message. Alexandra, Melantho has a small flask in her pocket. You need to get it. I'm sure it is poison. For the queen. You must save her. He let his eyes close in what he considered a rather noble fashion. Oh, no, you don't! She snapped. And with that, she slapped him across the face. You are not dying on me, you hear me? Medon opened his eyes with a sudden jolt as Alexandra desperately yelled for Eurycleia.
Meanwhile, Penelope had almost slumbered into sleep.
Athene had heard her prayers, and she decided to bring comfort to this heartbroken queen. So she shaped herself into a phantom that looked exactly like Penelope's sister Iphthime, who lived far away in Pherae and came to stand at Penelope's bedside. Do not feel sorrow, the phantom whispered. The gods love Telemachus, and they will see him safely home. Penelope, half sleeping on the border of dream, stirred and murmured back, My dear sister, what brings you here so far from your home? You tell me not to fear, but my heart is torn in two for my brave husband still lost to me, and now for my son, who faces danger by sea and by land. Fear nothing, said the phantom gently. Telemachus is not alone. Athene herself stands by him. She sent me here to bring you strength and peace. With that, the dream vanished into the night. Yet it left behind a glow of hope, and Penelope woke comforted, her heart lighter than it had been for many long days. Across the hall from her chamber, the handmaiden Melantho was looking at her door with a small flask hidden in the palm of her hand.
Far from her chamber, dark deeds were being set in motion. Antinous unashamedly spoke to a group of the suitors in the great hall. Future ministers of my soon-to-be kingdom, Antinous declared, puffing himself up like a rooster on parade. His eyes glittered with arrogance. Once we've dealt with that little boy, I shall give Penelope a wedding night she will never forget. He threw back his head and laughed. Loud, ugly, cruel. The sound slithered across the room. The other suitors, eager to please their swaggering leader, joined in with their own hollow laughter, though some glanced nervously at one another. The hall rang with it. Mockery, menace, and the stink of men drunk on their own wicked plans. At nightfall, he slipped down to the shore with 20 chosen men, boarded a waiting ship, and rowed hard until they reached a small island lying in the strait between Samos and Ithaca. There, in the cover of a sheltered bay, they anchored, watching the sea, waiting like hunters for Telemachus to return.